Hey guys, I'm Alex, also known as Mont, and recently I got my hands on Dark Souls 2. I think that about says it all, right? So, this video is going to be a summary of my first 3 hours of playing. Needless to say, there will be spoilers and this will be long and rambling. Gameplay spoilers and story and lore spoilers. If you don't want to hear, stop watching now. This is also going to act as an Ask Me Anything type video. Namely, you have questions, ask them in the comments and I'll do my best to answer. Oh, and there's no gameplay footage, I'm afraid. I'm not allowed to show any. Right, so let's get started. The intro movie for Dark Souls 2 is cool. It's not as epic as in terms of scale compared to the first game's intro. It's far more localized and personal. But it's pretty as hell. In fact, that's a very apt way to put it. Pretty as hell. Because there's some gruesome stuff here. Anyway, once the intro finishes I find myself awakened in a blue-tinged area full of swaying grass. You can actually see that area in the Curse trailer, as it happens. I messed around there for a while. At this point, your character's completely blank, you don't have a class, I don't think you even have a gender. You're covered in rags that hide your features. And I died twice there. First time I got too curious and rolled off a cliff. Second time I ran off a cliff whilst moving and managing the rather empty inventory. Anyway, so my very first impression of the game was that I was sitting way too close. This was on a console and sitting so close made the game look a lot more ugly than it really is. A short jog's distance away, however, and I entered a little hut filled with 3 old crones. They told me about how I was going to get wrecked and then they asked me my name and then I got to make my character. I started with the Bandit class, who seems to be a mix of the Bandit and Hunter from Dark Souls 1. Started out with a hand axe, the Pyromancer one, and a bow, and no shield. Although he had a few arrows, they ran out fast. It's worth noting that the axe seemed to have a different moveset than it did in the first game. As for starting gifts, I had a choice of the following: Human Effigy, the new item you use to reverse hollowing, like humanity, a life ring, a ring that, you know, gives you more life, healing wares, a selection of healing consumables and the like. Then there was a seed of a tree giant which you can eat, and I did actually see some like resting giant tree things around, so maybe it has something to do with that. There was also a bonfire ascetic or something like that, which you can use to burn in the bonfire to make the game harder. There's also a homeward bone, boring, and petrified something. Yes, it was literally called petrified something, and it was along the lines of might be useful at some point. Could be the new pendant. Moving on, there was an optional tutorial area that I mostly skipped, although one part had a large ogre type creature on a beach. Now, I thought I'd be smart and take it out, so I shot it in the face with my bow. And then another one came around the corner. I led them on a merry chase for some minutes before I finally died. They were apparently guarding a coffin that, get this, when you jump in it, it changes your gender. Because that's what everyone wanted. Maybe? Past the tutorial area I emerged from a narrow valley and into the blinding light of Majula, our new Firelink Shrine. A beautifully haunting coastal village that overlooks a scene that you might expect to see in a travel commercial. I spent some moments here just scanning the horizon. If there's one thing that Firelink taught me, it's that you'll be able to see far off areas that you'll visit. One thing that stood out to me was a huge tower in the distance. Well, I'm positive we'll be going there. I also saw some ships at sea that seemed to be, like, wrecked on stones and rocks and all that, and there was also like a fortressy place you could see. Anyway, I spent some time messing around in Majula. At this point in the game I had no Estus flasks. When I talked to the Emerald Herald, however, she gave me one and told me what my mission was. I'm to become the new king in place of Vendrick. Or that's the idea. She doesn't really seem to think it's gonna work, and she suggests that we, seek misery, because misery will make you strong, or something kind of emo like that. But in order to achieve this, first things first, you need to defeat 4 mighty souls, kinda like the Lord Vessels maybe? Just who they are though, she didn't say. She had quite a soothing voice though, I thought, although I couldn't quite place her accent. She gave an Emerald Estus flask, and she's also how you level up now. At least at the start of the game. Maybe later on in the game you can level up at the bonfires, I don't know. But I found an Estus shard in the village somewhere that you can give to the Herald, and she'll give you more Estus. I started out with 1, and when I gave her the shard, then I had 2. I wasn't actually sure how to leave Majula and go to the next area, but I did find a strange monument that let me join a covenant. I didn't, because it said it would make the game a lot harder, and I didn't really want that just yet. So I found myself eventually descending a staircase, which led to me thinking, oh good, I'm entering some sort of catacombs area. Turns out it was a seeming dead end though, although I did find a shield down there. Very nice, even if it wasn't really a good shield. Yeah. Eventually though I found another way out of Majula, and there I found a man wishing to get past the gate, only it was shut, and he could not advance. Rather like old Siegmeyer, eh? It's worth noting that the way forward was barred because there was a lever that needed to be pulled, but it was blocked by what appeared to be a petrified human. So I talked to the man a little, and then I killed him. He put up a good struggle, but a few ripostes later, and the new animations, which are very nice, had him out for the count. The weapon he'd been whacking me with then became mine, and it looked a lot like the Moonlight Greatsword. Turns out it was called the Blue Moon Greatsword. It required 28 strength to use, and the damage output was actually, like, really low. The description stated that the sword was a powerful legendary item or some such, but then why was it so dull? That was the game, the game itself had in the description, like, why is it so dull? Which seems to give the impression that it's either a fake or a forgery, or that its power has been drained. Maybe you need to undergo some process to restore the blade to its full moonlight glory, or maybe you need to combine it with a soul, who knows. On the subject of items though, I saw quite a few cool miscellaneous items during my time playing. On the loading screen, for example, I saw a berserker blade, which was a katana. Also of note, I saw my shield on the loading screen, the Phoenix Palmer. But interestingly enough, it had a different description than what was posted on Facebook. I didn't have time to write it down, but it was something along the lines of, the Iron Keep fell into lava, but somehow this shield survived. Maybe it has a really high fire resistance. Ha! Speaking of shields, there was also something like an Archdragon shield that seems to regen stamina. Look out, Grass Crest. Finally, I also saw a very cool helm that was pure white silver with a long thin plume. That got me excited. Helmet plumes! Yes please. Anyway, back to the game. Eventually I found the right way to go and ended up in the Forest of Fallen Giants. This is probably the equivalent of the Undead Burg. Once you're done with the tutorial and hub area, this is where you're let loose into the world. There were hollows milling about, but I made short work of them. Soon found myself in the clearing with the slumbering knight, who's resting against a tree with arrows sticking out of him. Once I dealt with the surrounding hollows, I defeated him and took his sword for my own. How did I defeat him? Well, I mostly did roll back, poke, which, well, it worked, shall we say. I defeated him and took his sword for my own. Used it for quite a while. It was a knight sword and quite useful, but not, like, amazingly so. I kept pressing on though, eventually found myself in the area they showed in the very first gameplay demo of Dark Souls 2. It was full of the enemies who have helms that look like Paladin Leroy's, so I ended up using it. That was actually the new Hollow Soldier helm that once belonged to one of the royal troops or something along those lines. I did very well in this area if I say so myself. At one point, I saw an enemy guarding a treasure on a long narrow walkway. Nodding to myself, I turned around the moment I stepped onto it, and of course there was another enemy waiting up on a ledge behind me, wanting to pelt me with stuff. Somewhere in here I found a halberd and started using it. Oh, and you can now thrust with it behind your shield like a spear. Not long after that, I went down an elevator and came up against my first boss, the Last Giant. My first encounter with him was tense like nothing else. I got him to like 1% health. Then he KO'd me with a giant swing of his club arm thing. It's worth noting that he killed me in 2 hits from full health. Well, one of his attacks did like 60% of my health or so. Healing items were very sparse. I killed him not long after, however, and consumed his soul to give myself some levels. He wasn't super hard. I don't think people will have that much trouble with him, to be honest. So, after leveling, and I leveled almost exclusively strength for some reason, I began to mill around with less purpose after defeating him. But after unlocking a few doors with the key that he dropped, I came up against another boss, the Pursuer, a giant silver knight carried in by a raven who had a myriad of weapons on his back and held a huge sword and shield. He also seemed to be able to float off the ground a little way, which was very strange. I mean, it wasn't a glitch, as it was part of the cutscene he was introduced in. He just, like, floated off the ground dramatically. My weapon barely even dented his health bar. And this was my halberd, which was my most powerful weapon at that point. This guy is going to be a block to new players, the likes of which Capra can only dream of. He absolutely destroyed me. So I let him have that round and went off to explore other places. He fought like vaguely like Artorias with fast distance closing attacks, but he also had a ranged attack, a Moonlight Greatsword style sword beam he shot out and surprised me with. So, venturing off in other directions because of him, I killed some of those Turtle Knight enemies, and the first time I killed one, well, he dropped the chest armor that he's wearing. So yes, you can be a teenage, hollow, Havel turtle in Dark Souls 2. At one point I got into a panic situation with 2 of these guys chasing me around on a rooftop, and I overcame that by tossing firebombs at them, as you do. It's also worth noting that I bought the armor that belonged to the NPC I murdered earlier. I think his name was Jugo, or Hugo, of Benhart. And I'm not sure if the armor was only available from Melentia, the NPC merchant, because I killed him, or if it's always there. But I bought it because it had a badass cape. But it's worth noting, Melentia might be a bit like Domino Xena, if that is the case. Anyway, I eventually found a place with a ladder that I'd overlooked, and when I climbed that ladder thinking to stand on the roof and, you know, look badass with windy, blowing cape crap, the Pursuer fell in from the sky, and it wasn't a boss battle. He literally just flew in with the raven, and before he could even begin to beat me down, I went back down the ladder because I didn't want to fight him again. But yeah, I escaped and he didn't follow me down. Instead, he did what I can only surmise is the new black crystal, animation, when you use it to escape a world or whatever. He kneeled down, then he sort of sank into the floor and vanished from sight with a black sort of aura around him. I was a little worried by that, and I went back up later, after that, and then after I came back to the zone, and he didn't come back. But I carried on either way, and I met Pate, who advised me that there was treasure ahead, but he also warned me that the gate would shut behind me. It was almost like Patches in that moment. Nevertheless, I went forwards, destroyed the ambush, and when I managed to speak to him again, he kind of congratulated me, and he also gave me a white soapstone. How interesting. Next time I went there, he'd vanished, indicating that he moves around. Pate. Now what is he? Solaire or Patches? I want to like him and I want to trust him, but I'm conflicted. In one room, as soon as I walked in, a dozen Arbalest-type giant crossbow turrets almost blew me to Kingdom Come, just after I'd escaped Pate's ambushy thingy. Fortunately, I dodged it and then realised I could use them as well. And when I slid down a nearby ladder, I opened a chest which had some sort of crossbow trap inside it, which killed me. Then I ran back and I halberded that chest to death. And you know what I looted from its remains? Rubbish. Literally rubbish. Oh, FromSoft. Anyway, as my session started to wind down, I narrowly avoided being squashed by a boulder in a cave type place, talked to an NPC, whom I almost killed because I thought he was a hollow, and he gave me a key to a house in Majula, a big house in Majula. And in that house, well, I found some interesting stuff. Let's leave it at that. After that, I went around killing some NPCs, one of whom, the Crestfallen Warrior 3.0, murdered me with a very nice roll stab. I also killed the Emerald Herald, who dropped an item that seemed to be a homeward bone with infinite uses. I then went back to the starting area and killed everyone in that hut. I wanted a chance to use my aromatic ooze. Yeah, they dropped a lot of human effigies though. And yeah, I think that about covers it. So, as for some general things now. The game took a lot of getting used to. It feels a lot like Dark Souls, but it's also different enough to get me killed a few times. I think the main thing was how slow the character can be. There are times that, if it were Dark Souls, I would have been blocking, but in Dark Souls 2 I was getting hit instead. I think that is determined by the adaptability stat, which was very low on my bandit. But honestly, it's mostly just muscle memory. I'm so used to Dark Souls that I'm trying to play Dark Souls 2 as if it is Dark Souls 1, which it isn't. I rolled into a few attacks that killed me because I was too used to iframes on that very same subject. They're still there, I believe, but a lot less, well, forgiving. With rolls, you generally need to use them to roll away from the attack. You can't seemingly roll through them like you can in Dark Souls 1, which I suppose that's good because it was kind of weird that you could just roll through, like, everything. Likewise, hit stun took a lot of getting used to, as did all the new movesets. The longsword moveset didn't seem to be as good as it was in Dark Souls 1. Oh right, and I also found a fire longsword in one area, which seemed to upgrade with normal Titanite shards. How interesting. Overall, the gameplay felt solid, but it will take some adapting. Once you get used to it, however, I'm sure it will feel fine. I didn't really have any big controller issues, to be honest. I feel like the game is trying to teach you not to lock on to huge enemies though. Like in the last giant boss fight, locking onto him basically means you're staring at his feet and you can't see anything. Likewise, stamina management is more important than ever. When it comes to equip burden, from what I could tell, I was rolling at the same speed until I reached 70% equip burden, at which point I was fat rolling. I think roll speed might be changed by adaptability though? Who knows? Performance-wise, the game seemed to run fine most of the time, between 20 and 30 FPS, usually closer to 30 as far as I could tell. The game had a few very brief stuttering moments when moving from one area to the next. For example, when moving through a cave that joins two areas, the game will stutter ever so slightly as it loads the next area. And the loading screens seem to be quite long, at least to me. I mean, I am quite used to the PC loading screens, which are almost instant, to be fair. However, it's important to note that this wasn't a retail copy of the game I was playing, and that it might be improved in the retail copy. I don't know, they can always patch these sort of things. But honestly, it wasn't. I'm just nitpicking at this point. I didn't really run into any glitches, and the frame rate seemed to be a lot better than Dark Souls 1. I was playing the PS3 version. That took a lot of getting used to as well. As for how the game looks, well, I think they've pushed as much as they can out of the PS3 and 360. Cloth physics look really good, and I love how the weapons reflect the light now. I mean, they did it in Dark Souls 1, but it didn't look anywhere near as good. Oh, and my character had a beard. Just cause. Well, I think that's about everything, but still that's actually only half of it. If you have any questions though, I will do my best to answer them. I wrote a lot of notes whilst I was playing, which caused me to keep dropping my controller, but I hope you appreciate it. I wrote down every class's starting stats for your convenience. In conclusion, Dark Souls 2 seems like it's going to be amazing from what I've seen so far. But until next time, take care, and see you later.